Right. So, good morning, everyone. So, this is going to be one of the uh, interesting topic for today and tomorrow because I'm just going to brief and touch base on what exactly this rack and then rack architecture and what's the importance of rack uh, as a DBA career. So, if you are a Oracle DBA and if you want to grow in your career path and you want to get a good opportunities uh, and then you want to be a expert in all the domains of your database administrator world. So rack is a mandatory because without rack you you will be having very less opportunities in the outside world, because if you look at like few years back, the rack was nightmare and nobody knows what is rack, and then only few people are a rack expert, and then only few organization used to opt for the rack licensing and then migrate all their databases to rack. And but nowadays the things are got changed. uh, Most of the organization, wherever you go, everywhere the rack is mandatory. So even the small scale organization or even the startup organization, they will look for the rack as a mandatory feature or rack as a mandatory database for their business, because rack has its own features. They can easily scale up and scale down, and it will help scaling up their performance, and it will give a high availability, and it will give performance impact on their application. So there are a lot of rack features, and many people or many organization will try to migrate entire their databases, whichever like standalone or non-Oracle databases. They all are planning for migration to the RAC databases. So as a DBA, like it is one of the best added advantages and mandatory required skill to learn the RAC uh, architecture and then the to become a RAC expert. And then this course, whatever I framed here, it's all based upon my this 11 to 12 years of experience, whatever I have it with various organizations and various stakeholders and various clients wherever I worked. So all together I put and then formed this particular course. And then this is going to be purely based upon uh, what I seen it in my entire 12 years of experience. Whatever feels it's mandatory for a DBA as a RAC expert, what are the day in and day out of activities, uh, especially to the RAC, starting from the building to the patching, migration, upgradations, and then the tuning. And along with that, how you are going to secure your RAC databases, including your backups and recoveries. And then how this RAC is going to help us for high availability, and how this RAC database will help us for building the DR disaster recovery. All this concept put together and then form this particular course. And that's the reason I'm just going to call it as a Oracle RAC administration workshop. So if I should have told you that it's a RAC course, then probably I could have explained you theoretical part, and then I could have showed you all the presentation, and then I could have completed this course. But why I'm calling this as a workshop, each and every topic, whatever I'm gonna explain, it's all going to be on the practical live example. Everything we're going to see it in our lab, and then we're going to run the each and every command, whatever the concept we're going to cover, everything we're going to implement it in a real-time lab environment, and then we'll see the output, and then we'll feel it. That's where whatever the database course I'm going to teach, whatever the RAC course I'm going to teach, so both I'll call it as a workshop, because all the concept whatever going to explain here, everything is going to be real-time live demonstration. So whoever register for this RAC course, they will be added to dedicated WhatsApp group. All the communication will happen in that particular WhatsApp group, and then they will be getting access on our Google Drive. And then in the Google Drive, you will be getting the course presentation, whatever we are going to use it in this particular course. And then along with that, whatever the workbook, whatever the uh, built-in workbook documentation. Everything will be available over the Google Drive, and then you will get it readily available. You can just need to download, and then you need to practice those workbooks. And then there's a lab exercise. All each and every command, everything will be kept together in a next text notepad, and then you just need to whatever we're going to execute in our lab in a classroom. Each and every command will be captured here, and then the same command you're going to execute it in your lab exercise. And then there are like readily available rack setup, standalone setup, standalone databases, standalone with ASM. Everything will be available. You just need to download it, and you need to use it on your own laptop. So it's all like ready setup is all available, and you need to try to practice all the installation, and you need to play around your setup. And the moment you crash your setup and you are not able to recover it, you can easily download it and you can use them. So all those materials are all available. And then along with that, there are like thousands of automation script. You will get it. All those automation script will be used in our day and dev activities. So most of them are like used in our day and dev activities. So you can try it out, all those scripts, and then see the output, and then make use of your day-to-day work. And then at the end, like we'll be having a bunch of interview questions and answers. Everything will be covered at the each and every topic. And then at the end of the course also, you will see specific interview questions and answers for each and every topics. Right, so having said that, uh, if you are if you want to know more about our RAC course, so you can go to our blog, and then you can search for RAC course. Our blog is malik034blogs.com, and then you can search for training section, or you can directly go inside this particular URL, and it will directly take you to RAC course, and then you will see all the course content. I already briefed about what is the course content, how it looks, and if you want to go ahead and if you want to brief it once again, you can go ahead and check this particular blog, malik034blogspot.com. We'll start with the introduction to the clusterware, and then introduction to the clusterware will talk about the difference between standalone and rack, why standalone is not capable of handling high availability, not how standalone database is, why it is not allowing us to do scale up and scale down, why rack is allowing us to do scale up and scale down, what are the feasibilities, why RAC is much more advanced in the market than our database. Everything we're going to discuss here in the introduction to the clusterware, followed by networking and the shared disks, and how the intercommunication happens between the RAC nodes. Everything we're going to talk about uh, in the introduction to the cluster, and followed by your clusterware architecture. In the clusterware architecture, we'll talk about your voting disk, OCR, and what is OLR, and then what are your clusterware startup sequence, and what are the dependencies, how you're going to set up your scan, how you're going to set up your intercommunication, how you're going to monitor your disk heartbeat, network heartbeat. So all this we're going to talk about in our clusterware architecture. And then we'll start with some of the basics of Linux, how you're going to build your Linux in your VMware VirtualBox. And once you build, how you can customize that one. After that, how you're going to clone that particular VM. Once you clone it, how you're going to configure your DNS, your DHCP, your public IP, private IP, scan IP, and how you're going to create your shared disk, how you're going to install your Oracle ASM libraries, how you're going to create ASM disk. Everything we can see it here, networks and shared disk configuration. And then followed by your actual cluster where grid infrastructure installation, or 2-node grid infrastructure, 3-node grid infrastructure, everything we can see it. Once the grid infrastructure is done, we are going to install our Oracle RAC home. How to make sure that your Oracle home is RAC enabled or RAC disabled. So there are certain libraries you have to go ahead and check whether the RAC parameter is enabled at your Oracle home or not. If you are having a 4-node cluster, can I install 2-node RAC? Can I install 3-node RAC? So all we're going to discuss, all the options we're going to explore, and then followed by creation of some of the disk groups, and then followed by creation of your RAC database. And then all this Oracle home installation, RAC database creation, and your clusterware installation has its own bunch of pre-checks, post-checks, and then some of the prerequisites packages you need to install, some of the prerequisites user you need to create, some of the prerequisites group you need to create, some of the directories and permissions all you need to create. Everything we can see one by one in a step-by-step manner. And then once the installation is done, so that concludes your initial configuration and setup for your further course. So this installation and configuration is very, very mandatory because being a RAC admin, a RAC expert, so the installation is one of the basics and mandatory tasks. You should understand how you are going to set up your RAC grid infrastructure, so that which covers your networking, which covers your storage, which covers your Linux administration, and which also covers your your management of your public network, private network, and scan network. So with all this concept, so your further continuation of your RAC administration task will be like very, very simpler. So first you need to understand this basic concept of installation and configuration and setup of your RAC. So once you're done with that one, you pretty much will get a hands-on on the RAC basics fundamentals. So that for, after that, whatever you can do it, all will be your day-to-day activities, whatever as a RAC expert in day in and day out, whatever the activities you're going to do it, it will be like much more easier. So that's where one, you are a RAC expert, you should understand how you're going to install and configure your RAC clusterware. Right. So if you have any questions while explaining, feel free to unmute yourself and then ask any questions, or you can post your questions in this chat here. Right. So, and then once we is done with our setup, we'll start with our ASM architecture. We'll understand the ASM architecture, and then we'll play around ASM. We'll create some of the disk groups with normal redundancy, with high redundancy. We're going to drop the disk. We're going to add the disk. We're going to migrate one disk group to another disk group. We have a disk group called data. We want to rename it to data 1 or data C1. How you're going to rename that disk group. So all whatever the related to your ASM disk groups and ASM disks and ASM rebalancing and ASM background processes and how ASM is communicates with your database instances, all we're going to see it when it comes to your ASM architecture and ASM administration. And then once we understood with our ASM and grid infrastructure architecture, we'll start with our actual clusterware and database administration. So clusterware and database administration are two different topics here. Clusterware is your entire grid infrastructure management. We will manage with your SRVCTL, cluster control utility, and database administration we will manage with your SRVCTL. So that's your server control utility. So how you are going to manage your cluster, how you're going to manage your database, what is this CRSCTL, what is this SRSCTL, what are the commands comes along with that, and we'll play around that, and we will do a lot of things with SRSCTL, CRSCTL, and we'll restart our cluster, we'll restart our services, and we'll bounce our cluster, and we'll restart our database, and we'll restart our cluster nodes, and we'll do a complete shutdown of all the cluster nodes, and we'll do a rolling shutdown of our cluster nodes. Everything we can see it over there. And then apart from that, we'll play around our OLR, OCR, voting disk, how you can migrate your OLR, how you're going to migrate your voting disk. And then if it's a normal redundancy or high redundancy, and then how many voting disk I'll be having it, how many OCR disk I'll be having it, how many OCR copies I'll be having it, how you're going to take OLR, your local registry backup, how you're going to take your OCR backup, and then if you lose your voting disk, what happens? All those concept we're going to drill down, and then we'll go understand more in clusterware administration, and then followed by your database administration. So with the help of SRVCTL, how you're going to manage your databases, especially RAC specific parameter. Some parameter like cluster underscore database. what is the cluster underscore database? If it is a true, what happens? If I set it to false, what happens? And then in case of RAC database, where is my password file? Where is my SP file? How I can move my password file from ASM disk group to normal file system? How I can copy my SP file from normal file system to ASM disk group, and then how I can move some of the data files are archive log files or the password file or the SP file from one disk group to other disk group. So all we can play around our database administration task, and then we are going to convert our P file to SP file and SP file to P file, and we'll do srvctl config my databases and what are the configurable parameter you can do with srvctl, and then how you can recreate your password file and then push it to your ASM disk group, and then how your redo log and control files and data files are resides inside your disk groups, and how you're going to see them, how you're going to manage them, and then how your table space and your data files are communicates inside your ASM disk groups. All we're going to see it here, including your undo and temp, and then how many undo data files, how many undo table space we need it in case of 2 node, 3 node, 4 node racks. So that we can see it here when it comes to your RAC administration, and then followed by your RAC database backups and recovery. We'll see RAC database backup, how you're going to take a RAC database backup and then restore it to normal file system, and then normal file system backup, how you're going to restore it to RAC database. So this is like normal feature. I have a standalone databases. I want to restore into my RAC. I have a RAC databases. I want to restore it as a standalone databases in normal file system. How you're going to do it? So that's one of the common questions they will ask in the interview. So that we're going to see it, and then different backup strategies of my RAC databases, and which node I'm going to take a backup. I have 4 node RAC database, and which node I can start my RMAN backup. Can I use all 4 nodes? Can I use 2 nodes? Can I use 3 nodes? Can I use all 4 nodes for my RMAN backup? And then what happens if I start backup from all 4 nodes? And then is the backup valid for if I take a backup from one node, is that valid backup? Right. So all those uh, the backup related concept will play around that, and then whatever the backup we take it, and then where you are going to take those backups. Are you going to take the backup into local file system, or you are going to take that backup into your ASM? So all those backup related issues, and around that backup, what are the different configurable parameters? What are the service backup service or can make use of that during the backup? All we can see it during the backups and recoveries. And then we'll start with our listener understanding, because in Clusterware there are so many listeners comes into picture. Your ASM listener, scan listener, your local listener, and how this scan, ASM, and local listener will coordinate each other. Can I use a local listener, or use a local listener is mandatory? Can I use a local listener, and if I register my local listener with Clusterware, what happens? If I don't register my local listener with Clusterware, what happens? So all those scan listener, local listener, remote listener, and your ASM listener, all the relationship between them, everything we can see it when we talk about listeners. And then followed by your multi-tenancy architecture with RAC, how you're going to create your PDBs and CDBs with the RAC, 2 node RAC, 3 node RAC. So is it mandatory to create a PDBs with a 2 node RAC or 3 node RAC? Can I create a 1 node PDB or 2 node PDB? And then how you're going to take a export of your PDBs, and then how you're going to import it. All this, like whatever comes up comes to your PDB architecture, and then especially to the RAC database, we'll see what are the parameters you can tune it, and then how you can install your pluggable databases for 1 node PDB or 2 node PDB or 3 node PDB in case of RAC databases, and converting your CDB and then as a non-PDB, or like you can export your PDB and then restore it to your non-CDB, or you can export from non-CDB and then restore into your PDB, or you can convert your non-CDB as a PDB, or you can export that PDB alone and then make it as a non-CDB. What are the different options we can play around all of this, and then how you can convert to your CDB, how you can connect to your CDB, how you can connect to your PDB, and then how you're going to create your RAC CDB databases. And then if you create a PDB, and then what happens, is that going to be RAC PDB or it's going to be just one node PDB? And then if it's a RAC PDB, shall I start only one PDB instance and then shut down other PDB instances? All those tricks and tweaks, everything we can see it over here. And then we'll see some of the ACFS. ACFS is also one of the very brilliant feature. How you can configure your ACFS and how you can mount your disk group as the normal mount point, and you can use that mount point for normal operations. And then we'll have a RAC One Node databases. RAC One Node is like, it's a one node instance will be running on any one of the cluster nodes. How you can relocate your RAC One Node from one node to other node. We'll play around the RAC One Node, and then along with that, we'll start with our RAC database patching and other things. Like, first we'll patch with our Clusterware databases patching and our grid home patching and our database home patching, and then followed by our data patch. And then once you run the data patch, what happens inside the PDBs? If I have multiple PDBs, if I need to open those PDBs or all those things, we're going to see it when it comes to your patching and all those things. We'll play around that. And then we'll do understand some upgradation of your Clusterware upgradation or your database upgradation. And then so many other things we'll play around this one. And then once we do this cluster upgradations, what are the prerequisites you need to take? What are the post-requisites you need to take care? And without cluster upgradation, can I upgrade my database? So it is not possible. And then once I do cluster upgradation, and then what are the prerequisites and post-requisites I need to take care of before and after my database upgradation? And once my database upgradation is done, and what are things I need to consider? If it is the CDB and then PDB, how I can manage my database upgradation. So if I upgrade my CDB, is all my PDBs are going to upgrade? So everything we can see it here in case of chapter number 20, that is all purely talks about the upgradation. And then we'll see node addition and node deletion. So this is what like if like I have 2 node rack and then I want to upgrade to 3 node, 4 node, 5 node, then how I can do it? Node addition. If I have 4 node, I want to remove one of the node, then what happens? So all we can play around node addition and node deletion. And then we can convert a single instance to rack, and what are the utilities we can use that conversion of your standalone database or single instance to rack. You can use your DBCA, or you can use your OEM, you can use rconfig. All those concepts we can see, and then we can play around that. And then followed by some of the resume writing and interview preparations and mock interviews and all those things. So this is like complete topics what we kept together. And then along with this one, there are so many other topics will be discussed during the each and every topic, but that is like again subjected to the time limitation and other things. Yeah, definitely this is not the course content. Along with that, there will be so many concepts will be going and discussing as and when like each and every topic will be coming through. So any questions so far, whatever we discussed? Great. So
Malik, can we have in a rack scenario, we have all the data and FRA on SAN storage and OCR as well on SAN storage.
right.
Can we include a topic if we want to migrate all of these things from old SAN storage to new SAN storage? Like there may be a scenario when your old SAN storage might be obsolete and you want to migrate the database to new SAN storage.
No, that will be like you cannot do OS migration. That will be like your Linux admin task. So what you can do, you can just take a backup and restore it here. So migration, you cannot do it here. Migration will be purely your Linux or your storage admin task.
Okay, but
Right.
I guess it needs to be done on the Oracle admin as well side.
Oracle admin side, he will just take a backup and restore it to other side. Like, my OS level migration, you no need to worry about at the DBA task. So once your OS migration is done, so you just need to.
Not OS, but the data on the SAN storage. Like if we want to migrate from old SAN storage to the new SAN storage.
Right. So your old SAN storage, they will do some. They have a different utility. Like they have a kind of a vMotion. There are like different tools. You no need to worry about your database. Even if your database is up and running, they can do a OS the storage migration. It will not impact your database. There will be a performance impact, but you no need to bring down your databases. With the databases and services are up and running, they can do a OS migration. They have something called vMotion, or they have some utilities. They can use it at the backend and they can migrate it.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you want to altogether go into a different disk and your OS admin is completely shutting down, then only option is you have to take an entire database backup and then restore it to the different storage disks once you create it. Or else, like, you can create your own disk in the different storage, whatever the new storage, and then mount those disks, and then you can move your all the data files from one disk group to other disk group, and then you can decommission your old SAN disks.
Okay.
Right. So give me, guys, like I'm gonna restart my Zoom session. Probably this session is gonna end here. I'm just gonna fix my Zoom issue here. We'll reconnect here in next 2 minutes. Okay.
Okay, Malik, I just want to share that when said, need to change the storage from one to the other. If you are bringing down the system, so when everything is down, then the Linux admin or storage admin can copy the data to the new allocated disk, and new allocated disk can be presented as the same disk which is present now. Like whatever amount funds you have, keep the same names after copying the data at OS level by storage admin, then database doesn't know about that. You can start normally.
Right. Right. So that the disk header and everything will be like same it point to database. You can just start it as simple as like normal database. Right.
Yep.
Right. So guys, we'll rejoin the same link in next 2 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
I'm
Do
gonna
we need to
stop.
disconnect?
Yeah, disconnect and we'll rejoin using the same link in next 2 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry for the disturbance, guys. Thank you.